In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that the galaxy's most feared creatures have forgotten. Never underestimate a parent's love. When alien raiders descended upon the remote farming colony of New Haven, they saw only easy prey, helpless humans scratching out an existence on the galaxy's forgotten edge. They took what they wanted: crops, technology, and one terrified 12-year-old boy named Marcus Chun. What they didn't know was that Marcus's father, David Chun, had spent 15 years trying to forget who he used to be. The galaxy once whispered his name in hushed, terrified tones. They called him the Silent Death, a human sniper whose impossible shots had ended wars and toppled empires. But that was before he met Sarah, before they fled to the Outer Rim to build a peaceful life, before Marcus was born under alien stars. Now, as David stares at the smoking ruins of his home and the empty chair where his son used to sit for breakfast, something cold and deadly awakens in his chest. The farmers of New Haven only know him as the quiet man who grows the best tomatoes in 3 sectors. They're about to discover that some skills, once learned, are never truly forgotten. The Krillian Empire thinks they've captured just another human child for their slave markets. They have no idea they've just declared war on the one human the galaxy learned to fear. And, across the stars, in the Empire's most secure facilities and impregnable strongholds, beings that have never known terror are about to learn why humans don't just fight wars, they win them. The hunt begins now, and David Chun is coming home. The morning mist still clung to the valleys of New Haven when the ships came. David Chun was checking the irrigation systems in his tomato fields, watching the twin suns paint the sky in shades of amber and gold when the first shadow fell across his crops. He looked up to see vessels that didn't belong in this peaceful corner of space. Sleek, predatory craft with the distinctive crimson markings of Krillian raiders. His blood turned to ice water. After 15 years of peace, war had found him again. David dropped his tools and ran toward the farmhouse, his mind calculating distances and angles even as his heart hammered against his ribs. 300 meters to the house. Marcus would be finishing breakfast, probably arguing with his mother about his homework again. Sarah would be packing his lunch for the school transport that wouldn't come today. The first plasma bolt struck the communications tower at the edge of New Haven settlement, sending sparks and debris cascading across the morning sky. The attack had begun with surgical precision. Cut communications first, prevent any distress calls from reaching the sector patrol. David recognized military tactics when he saw them, even when they were being used against farmers and families. He burst through the farmhouse door to find chaos. Sarah was shoving emergency supplies into a pack, while Marcus stood frozen at the window, watching the alien ships descend like mechanical vultures. The boy's face was pale but determined, showing the same stubborn courage that had first attracted David to his mother all those years ago. "Dad," Marcus said without turning from the window. "They're heading for the school." David's jaw tightened. The school housed 60 children from across the farming district. These weren't random pirates looking for easy loot. This was a coordinated slave raid, targeting the most vulnerable. The Krillians had a thriving market for young beings from developing worlds, and human children brought premium prices due to their adaptability. "Sarah, take Marcus to the root cellar," David commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made both his wife and son snap to attention. "Lock it from the inside, and don't come out until you hear my voice. Only my voice, calling the all clear." "What about you?" Sarah demanded, recognizing something in her husband's tone that she hadn't heard since the early days of their relationship, when he still had nightmares about places with names like Kepler Station and the Centauri Offensive. David was already moving toward their bedroom, toward the closet where he'd hidden parts of himself for 15 years. "I'm going to remind some aliens why humans don't make good victims." The weapon case was hidden behind false panels that even Marcus had never discovered during his childhood explorations. David's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, inputting the biometric locks that recognized not just his fingerprints, but the specific muscle tension patterns of someone trained to kill with precision. Inside, nestled in custom-formed foam, lay the tools of his former trade. The rifle was a work of art disguised as an instrument of death. 2 meters of matte black composite, and crystalline focusing elements, designed to put holes through starship hulls at ranges that most species couldn't even see. The Terran Defense Force had given him this weapon 20 years ago, when he was young and angry and very, very good at making impossible shots. They'd never asked for it back, probably because they assumed David Chun had died in the same explosion that officially ended his military career. He assembled the weapon with the fluid motions of muscle memory, each component clicking into place with satisfying precision. The scope came online with a soft hum, its targeting systems interfacing with the neural implant he'd never had removed. Suddenly, the world became a tactical grid of distances, wind speeds, and probability calculations. Through the bedroom window, he could see the Krillian ground teams deploying from their landing craft. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance, spreading out to begin their harvest of human cargo. David counted 20 visible hostiles, probably twice that number still in the ships. Standard Krillian tactics called for overwhelming force against primitive worlds, shock, and ought to prevent organized resistance. They were about to learn that David Chun was neither shocked nor awed. The first shot came from 800 meters, through the scope of a rifle that most galactic military experts claimed couldn't exist. The Krillian squad leader's head simply disappeared in a spray of violet blood and shattered carapace, leaving his team staring in confusion at empty air. The second shot, fired 1.3 seconds later from a position 30 meters to the left, took down the communications specialist before he could report contact with hostile forces. David was already moving to his third firing position when the Krillians began their panicked search for the invisible enemy. They sprayed pulse fire randomly into the surrounding fields, their four-armed forms twitching with nervous energy as their advanced sensors failed to locate the source of the attacks. Their thermal imaging showed nothing but cooling morning mist. Their motion detectors registered only wind-blown crops. The third shot punched through the chest of the Krillian weapons specialist, the high-velocity round designed for ship-to-ship combat, turning the alien's torso into a cloud of organic debris. The fourth and fifth shots came in quick succession, each from a different position, each finding a target with mathematical precision that defied the laws of probability. In 45 seconds, David had reduced a 20-warrior raiding party to 14 confused and terrified survivors. They huddled behind their landing craft, chittering in their clicking language about ghost warriors and impossible humans. Their confidence was bleeding away with their brother's violet blood. But David wasn't interested in terrorism or psychological warfare. He was interested in information, and dead aliens couldn't tell him where his son was being taken. The sixth shot was different. A precise hit to the knee joint of a Krillian sergeant, sending the alien tumbling to the ground with a keening wail of pain. The wound was survivable, but excruciating, designed to draw medical attention from the remaining raiders. David watched through his scope as two warriors moved to assist their fallen comrade, exactly as he'd predicted. The seventh shot disabled their medical scanner. The eighth put a hole through the left shoulder of one would-be rescuer. The ninth shattered the communication device of another. David was conducting a symphony of precisely applied violence, each note designed to drive his enemies toward a specific conclusion. He was hurting them. The surviving Krillians scrambled back toward their ship, carrying their wounded and leaving their dead where they'd fallen. David let them retreat, counting heads and weapons as they fled. 14 survivors, down from 20. More importantly, they were scared now, communicating frantically with their command vessel in orbit. Through his scope's enhanced optics, David could see the larger ships hovering above New Haven settlement, their cargo bays already filled with human prisoners. His neighbors, his friends, children he'd watched grow up, all of them bound for slave markets on the far side of the galaxy. And somewhere in that collection of terrified humanity was his son. David began moving toward the settlement, his rifle cradled with practiced ease as he navigated through terrain he'd walked peacefully for 15 years. Every rock, every hill, every line of sight was cataloged in his tactical memory. The Krillians had chosen their battlefield poorly. They'd come to a human's home ground. The settlement was in chaos when he arrived. Buildings burned from plasma strikes while Krillian warriors herded civilians toward transport ships with the casual efficiency of farmers loading livestock. David could see families torn apart, children crying for parents who were being loaded into separate containers. The systematic cruelty of it made his jaw clench with cold fury. He found a sniper's nest in the old water tower, 300 meters from the main landing zone. From here, he could see everything: the layout of enemy forces, the location of the prisoners, the weak points in the Krillian operation. Most importantly, he could see Marcus. His son was in the third transport container, pressed against the transparent aluminum walls with 24 other children from the settlement. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but his eyes held the same stubborn determination David had seen at breakfast that morning. Marcus wasn't just crying. He was watching, learning, looking for chances to escape. David smiled grimly. That was his boy. The Krillian commander was a massive specimen, nearly 3 meters tall with the scarred carapace that marked a veteran raider. He stood near the command ship, coordinating the loading operations with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. David could see the commander's confidence in every gesture. Another successful raid on a primitive human colony, another cargo hold full of valuable slaves. David adjusted his scope and began calculating wind speeds and atmospheric density. The shot would be nearly a kilometer through shifting air currents and multiple obstacles. It would require perfect timing and absolute precision. It would be impossible for anyone except David Chun. The shot took the Krillian commander's left arm clean off at the shoulder, spinning the massive alien around in a spray of violet blood. The alien's roar of pain and rage echoed across the settlement as he stumbled backward, clutching at the stump where his appendage used to be. Chaos erupted among the raiding party as they scrambled for cover, their carefully organized operation dissolving into panic. David was already repositioning when the return fire began. Plasma bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing, turning metal and stone into superheated gas. The Krillians had finally located his general position, but David was never where they expected him to be. The water tower had been his primary nest, but David had prepared 17 secondary positions throughout the settlement. He moved between them like a ghost, appearing just long enough to take a shot before vanishing into the maze of buildings and equipment he knew better than anyone. The 8th shot disabled a transport engine. The 9th took out a communications relay. The 10th sent a Krillian warrior tumbling from a rooftop position. Each shot was precisely calculated to maximize chaos while minimizing the risk to human prisoners. But David was running out of time. The Krillian fleet in orbit was responding to the surface team's distress calls, sending down reinforcements and heavy weapons. Soon, this would become a full military engagement, and civilians would start dying in the crossfire. He needed to change the tactical situation before that happened. David activated his rifle's secondary function, a feature that officially didn't exist in any military database. The weapon's crystalline focusing array reconfigured itself, drawing power from the microfusion cell hidden in the stock. Instead of projecting solid rounds, the rifle now fired concentrated bursts of coherent energy capable of penetrating starship armor. The shot that followed was visible as a lance of blue-white fire that punched through the side of the nearest Krillian vessel like a spear through paper. Secondary explosions blossomed across the ship's hull as the energy beam found fuel lines and weapon magazines. The vessel listed to one side, trailing fire and debris as its pilots fought to maintain control. Silence fell across the settlement. Human prisoners and Krillian raiders alike stared in stunned disbelief at the smoking hole in what had been considered an invulnerable warship. Energy weapons capable of such damage existed, but they were mounted on military cruisers and orbital platforms, not carried by individual soldiers. David's voice carried across the settlement with electronic amplification, broadcast through speakers he'd rigged throughout New Haven during his years of preparation. He'd always known this day might come, had always planned for the possibility that his past would catch up with his present. "Attention, Krillian forces," he said in accented but fluent Krillian tradespeak, his words clicking and chittering through the alien language with cold precision. "You have taken something that belongs to me. Return all human prisoners to the settlement center. Withdraw your forces to orbit, and we can discuss terms. Refuse, and I will demonstrate why your species learned to fear the name David Chun. The silence that followed was profound. Every Krillian warrior in the settlement knew that name, had heard the stories passed down through military databases and criminal networks. The Silent Death, the human sniper who had single-handedly turned the tide of the Kepler station siege. The ghost who had hunted pirate lords across 3 sectors without ever being seen or caught. The human who had been declared dead 15 years ago. The Krillian's second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Threx, activated his personal communicator with trembling claws. His words were barely audible, whispered with the kind of fear usually reserved for natural disasters or cosmic phenomena. Command, we have a problem. The human is alive. David Chun is alive. Admiral Vex Thor had been enjoying his morning meditation aboard the Krillian Command Dreadnought when the impossible message arrived. The bridge crew had actually hesitated before delivering the communication, their carapaces clicking with nervous energy as they approached his command throne. In 40 years of military service, Vex Thor had seen his subordinates face down rebel fleets and hostile aliens without flinching. The fact that they were afraid to speak told him everything he needed to know about the contents of their report. Sir, chittered his communications officer, we're receiving conflicting data from the surface team. The raid was proceeding normally when they encountered unexpected resistance. The preliminary reports mentioned one hostile, but that seemed impossible given the casualty figures. Vex Thor's forearms gestured for the officer to continue. As the commander of Krillian Raiding Fleet 7, he had overseen the capture of over 50,000 slaves from primitive worlds. Resistance was common, but effective resistance was rare. Most species simply lacked the technological development or military training to pose serious threats to Krillian forces. The surface commander is dead, sir, along with 6 warriors in the initial engagement. Then, an unknown energy weapon disabled the transport vessel Crimson Fawn. The weapon signature doesn't match anything in our databases, but the penetration characteristics suggest ship-grade artillery. Ship-grade artillery, Vex Thor repeated slowly. Used by ground forces on a primitive farming world. Yes, sir. And then, the communications officer's chitin plates rattled with anxiety. The hostile identified himself. Claims to be David Chun. The name hit Vex Thor like a physical blow. Every senior officer in the Krillian military knew the legend of the Silent Death, the human sniper who had become a bogeyman used to frighten young warriors. David Chun was the reason Krillian forces approached human space with extreme caution, why slave raids targeted only isolated colonies far from military protection. Impossible, Vex Thor said, but his voice lacked conviction. David Chun died in the explosion at Centauri Station. Intelligence confirmed his death 15 years ago. Perhaps the intelligence was wrong, sir. Or perhaps the humans have trained others to use his name and tactics. Either way, we're facing an enemy capable of ship-killing strikes from unknown positions. Current casualty rate among surface forces is 35% and climbing. Vex Thor activated his personal display, studying the tactical situation on New Haven with growing unease. The human settlement was small, barely 3,000 inhabitants scattered across agricultural zones. According to their intelligence, the colony possessed no military installations, no planetary defense systems, no significant weapons technology. It should have been a routine harvest operation, land, capture, depart. Instead, his forces were being systematically destroyed by a single opponent. Bring me everything we have on David Chun, he commanded. Military records, psychological profiles, tactical assessments. I want to know what we're really facing down there. While his intelligence staff compiled the files, Vex Thor watched the tactical display with professional interest. The human was good, better than good. Each attack came from a different position, each shot precisely calculated for maximum strategic impact. The enemy wasn't just killing Krillian warriors. He was dismantling their entire operational structure with surgical precision. The psychological warfare was equally impressive. The surviving surface teams were reporting ghost sightings, impossible shots, an enemy who appeared and vanished without warning. Morale was collapsing as hardened raiders found themselves hunted by something they couldn't understand or counter. The intelligence files arrived within minutes, displayed on Vexthor's command screen in neat military formatting. David Chun, former sergeant in the Terran Defense Force, age 28 at time of presumed death. Confirmed kills for 117 enemy combatants across 12 different military engagements. Specialization: extreme range precision elimination, electronic warfare, psychological operations. The file included vid captures from his most famous engagements. Vexthor watched in fascination as David Chin single-handedly held off an entire Zalakian assault force at Kepler Station, his impossible shots turning a desperate last stand into a tactical masterpiece. The human had been outnumbered 50-1, fighting from prepared positions while defending civilian evacuation routes. He had won. "Sir," his tactical officer interrupted, "the surface teams are requesting immediate orbital support. They're taking heavy casualties and recommend withdrawal." "Denied," Vexthor said firmly. "We don't withdraw from primitive farming colonies. Double the surface forces and deploy the heavy assault teams. One human cannot defeat an entire fleet." Even as he gave the order, Vexthor felt a cold chill of uncertainty. The David Chun in these files wasn't just a skilled sniper. He was a tactical genius who specialized in turning superior numbers into disadvantages. Every engagement in his record showed the same pattern: outnumbered human forces using terrain, precision, and psychological warfare to defeat technically superior enemies. On the surface of New Haven, David Chun was preparing for the next phase of the engagement. The reinforcements were coming, just as he'd expected. Heavy assault teams would bring portable artillery and suppression weapons designed to level entire city blocks. The Krillians were abandoning precision in favor of overwhelming firepower. That suited him perfectly. David had spent the past 15 years building more than just a peaceful life on New Haven. He'd prepared for this day, establishing weapon caches and prepared positions throughout the settlement and surrounding terrain. What looked like simple farming equipment to casual observers was actually a sophisticated defense network built by someone who understood exactly how to fight a technologically superior enemy. The barn behind the settlement center looked like any other agricultural building, but David had constructed it with military-grade materials disguised as common farming supplies. The walls were reinforced with ablative armor plating salvaged from decommissioned starships. The Foundation held weapon systems that officially didn't exist in civilian databases. David descended into the barn's hidden sublevel, where 15 years of careful preparation waited in climate-controlled storage. Weapons, ammunition, electronic countermeasures, medical supplies, everything needed to conduct an extended guerrilla campaign against superior forces. He'd hoped never to use any of it. But David Chun had always been a realist. The communication system came online with a soft hum, connecting him to a network he'd hoped never to access again. His military neural implants synced with databases that existed in the shadow spaces between official government networks, systems used by soldiers who operated beyond the reach of conventional oversight. Phoenix Control, this is Silent 6. He broadcast on encrypted frequencies that hadn't been used in over a decade, requesting immediate priority escalation to Sector Command. The response came within seconds, transmitted by communication systems that existed outside normal space-time constraints. Silent 6, this is Phoenix Control. Your status was listed as Kia. Please confirm identity with Authentication Protocol 77 Alpha. David provided the requested codes, biometric signatures that proved his identity beyond any possibility of deception. Somewhere in the depths of human space, automated systems were awakening protocols that had been dormant for 15 years, activating contingency plans that assumed the worst-case scenario. Authentication confirmed. Be aware that your status change has triggered automated escalation protocols. Sector Defense Command is being notified of active hostile engagement in the New Haven system. What is your operational status? Krillian slaver fleet conducting unauthorized raids on human civilian population. Approximately 40 vessels, including one heavy dreadnought. Current situation contains 150 human prisoners, including minors. Requesting immediate military intervention. Acknowledged. Sector Defense Fleet is mobilizing, but Nearest available forces are 72 hours out. Can you maintain operational effectiveness until relief arrives? David looked at his tactical displays, studying the Krillian force deployments and available resources. 72 hours against a fleet designed to capture and process thousands of slaves. Under normal circumstances, the odds would be impossible. But David Chun had never been normal. Affirmative, Phoenix Control. Silent 6 will hold position and protect civilian assets. Be advised that operational security has been compromised. Enemy forces are aware of my identity and tactical capabilities. Understood. Authorization granted for full-spectrum military engagement under colonial defense protocols. All restrictions on weapons usage are hereby lifted. Sector Command sends their regards, Silent 6. Give them hell. The communication ended, leaving David alone with his thoughts and his weapons. Full-spectrum engagement meant no limits, no civilian considerations beyond protecting human lives. He could use every weapon in his arsenal, employ any tactic necessary to delay the Krillian fleet until help arrived. The aliens had made a critical mistake when they took Marcus. They'd turned a retired soldier into an active combatant, transformed a peaceful farmer back into the weapon that had once terrorized half the galaxy. David Chun had spent 15 years learning to be human again, suppressing the cold calculations and deadly instincts that made him effective. Now those restraints were gone. The first Krillian heavy assault team landed in the settlement square 40 minutes later, their transport ship bristling with weapons designed to suppress civilian populations. 30 warriors in full combat armor, backed by automated weapon drones and suppression vehicles. They expected to face terrified farmers armed with agricultural tools. Instead, they found a carefully prepared killing ground. The explosions began the moment their boots touched New Haven soil. Mines that David had installed years ago, disguised as irrigation controls and crop monitoring equipment, detonated in carefully timed sequences. The first blast disabled their transport ship, trapping the assault team on the surface. The second and third destroyed their communication array and primary weapon drone. Then, the real killing began. David's rifle spoke from 12 different positions in rapid succession, each shot precisely calculated to exploit weaknesses in Krillian armor. The high-velocity rounds punched through composite plates like they were made of paper, finding gaps at joint seals and ventilation systems. Warriors who had survived countless battles against primitive weapons found themselves helpless against technology they couldn't understand or counter. The assault team commander, a veteran named Crixtal, had fought humans before. He knew their standard tactics, had studied their weaknesses and limitations. But this was something beyond his experience. A single opponent who fought like an entire military unit, appearing everywhere at once while remaining completely invisible to their sensors. Spread out. Crixtal commanded his surviving warriors. Use suppression fire to pin him down, then advance by squads. He's just one human. We can overwhelm him with numbers. The words had barely left his vocal chambers when a shot from 800 meters removed his left secondary arm at the shoulder. The pain was incredible, but worse was the realization that the shot had come from a position his soldiers had already cleared. The human was somehow moving between locations faster than should be physically possible. David was using the settlement's underground infrastructure, maintenance tunnels, and utility conduits that he'd expanded during years of preparation. What looked like simple farming equipment was actually a sophisticated transportation network that allowed rapid movement between prepared positions. The Krillians were hunting a ghost that materialized just long enough to kill before vanishing again. The battle continued for 3 hours, 30 Krillian warriors against one human sniper. When it ended, 28 aliens lay dead in the settlement square, their violet blood staining the soil that David had tended peacefully for 15 years. Crixtal survived only because David needed him alive to carry a message back to the fleet. The wounded commander stumbled toward his damaged transport ship, clutching the communication device that David had deliberately left intact. His report to Admiral Vexthor was brief and terrifying. Entire assault team eliminated. Request immediate withdrawal. The human is not just alive, he's evolved. In orbit above New Haven, Admiral Vexthor stared at his tactical displays with growing unease. He'd committed nearly 200 warriors to capturing a single human settlement, and David Chun had systematically destroyed them all. Current casualty rates exceeded 60%, higher than most major fleet engagements. Worse, the psychological impact on his remaining forces was becoming critical. Hardened raiders who had terrorized dozens of worlds were refusing ground assignments, claiming they would rather face enemy battle fleets than hunt ghosts in the ruins of New Haven. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we're detecting unusual communications traffic in human space. Multiple fleet movements, tactical deployments toward our position. It appears the humans are mobilizing military assets." Vexthor felt his confidence crumbling. The raid was supposed to have been completed hours ago, his ships already jumping to hyperspace with their human cargo safely contained. Instead, he was trapped in orbit above a burning settlement, watching his forces being dismantled by a legendary enemy who shouldn't even exist. "Time to complete slave processing?" he asked. "Another 18 hours minimum, sir. The human resistance has disrupted our timetable significantly." 18 hours. Vexthor studied the tactical situation, weighing options that all seemed to lead toward disaster. He could withdraw immediately, abandoning the captured slaves and accepting the loss of face that came with retreating from a single opponent. Or he could continue the operation, committing more resources to eliminate David Chun and complete their mission objectives. Either choice might destroy his career, but only one would preserve Krillian military reputation. "Deploy all remaining ground forces," he ordered. "Surround the settlement and begin systematic destruction of every structure. If we can't capture the human, we'll eliminate his operating environment. And prepare the orbital bombardment systems. If ground forces fail, we'll sterilize the entire colony from space." The order sent ripples of unease through his bridge crew. Orbital bombardment of civilian targets violated multiple galactic treaties and would bring serious political consequences. But Admiral Vexthor had already committed too much to retreat now. David Chun would die, even if it meant turning New Haven into a crater of fused glass. In his hidden command post, David monitored the Krillian communications with electronic warfare equipment that officially didn't exist. The aliens were escalating to orbital bombardment, exactly as his tactical models had predicted. They'd abandoned any pretense of surgical slave raids in favor of overwhelming destructive force. David activated emergency protocols, broadcasting evacuation orders to any human civilians still hiding in the settlement. The battle was about to move beyond ground-based engagement into something far more dangerous. In 12 hours, the Krillians would either withdraw in defeat or attempt to obliterate New Haven from orbit. David Chun intended to make sure they regretted either choice. He opened a new communication channel, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every Krillian ship in the fleet. His words were transmitted in perfect Krillian military formal speech, each syllable pronounced with the precision that came from years of studying enemy psychology. "Admiral Vexthor, this is David Chun. You have 12 hours to release all human prisoners and withdraw your fleet from this system. After that deadline, I will begin hunting your ships one by one, using methods that will make today's engagement seem gentle by comparison. Your choice, Admiral. End this now, or learn why the galaxy learned to fear human warfare." The transmission ended, leaving silence across the fleet communications network. Every warrior, every officer, every crew member had heard the ultimatum delivered in their own language by the legendary human killer they'd thought was safely dead. Admiral Vexthor stared at his tactical displays, calculating odds and weighing consequences. In 12 hours, he would either be celebrating the elimination of a dangerous enemy, or he would discover exactly why David Chun had become the most feared human in known space. The countdown had begun, and somewhere in the ruins of New Haven, the Silent Death was preparing for the kind of warfare that had made humans the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Admiral Vexthor had exactly 30 minutes left on David Chun's ultimatum when the first Krillian ship died. The frigate Blade Runner was conducting a routine patrol sweep of New Haven's outer asteroid belt when something impossible happened. A projectile moving at significant fraction of light speed punched through her primary hull, penetrated 4 bulkheads, and detonated in the engine compartment with enough force to crack the ship's spine. The vessel broke apart in a cascade of fire and venting atmosphere, her crew of 47 dead before they could even transmit a distress signal. The tactical officer aboard Vexthor's command ship stared at his displays in confusion, trying to understand what his sensors were telling him. "Sir, we've lost contact with Blade Runner. Last telemetry shows catastrophic structural failure, but there are no enemy vessels in scanner range." "Asteroid collision?" Vexthor suggested hopefully. "Negative, sir. The projectile came from the direction of the planet, traveling at 0.75 light speed. Whatever fired it had to be surface-based." Vexthor felt his confidence dissolve like morning frost. Surface-based weapons capable of engaging ships in deep space didn't exist outside of major military installations. New Haven was a farming colony with no infrastructure beyond basic agricultural support. The idea that someone could launch interplanetary strikes from a collection of barns and irrigation systems was technically impossible. David Chunt had just made the impossible look easy. "All ships, defensive formation Delta 7, Vexthor commanded. Maximum sensor sweeps, watch for incoming projectiles." But the sensors showed nothing until it was too late. The second shot arrived 8 minutes later, fired from a completely different vector at the light cruiser Silent Talon. The impact sent the ship spinning out of formation. Her port hull breached in 6 places as atmosphere vented into space. Emergency systems kicked in, sealing the worst damage, but Silent Talon was effectively crippled. "How?" whispered Vexthor's tactical officer. "How is he targeting ships from 300,000 kilometers away?" The answer lay buried in David's classified military files, records so secret that even Krillian intelligence had never accessed them. David Chun hadn't just been a sniper during his military service. He'd been part of an experimental program that pushed the boundaries of human warfare into realms that violated established tactical doctrine. The weapon system hidden beneath New Haven wasn't just artillery. It was a gravitational mass driver that used the planet's rotation and magnetic field to launch projectiles at relativistic velocities. David had spent 15 years building it, disguising the construction as irrigation improvements and geological surveys. What looked like water wells were actually gravitational focusing arrays. What appeared to be crop rotation patterns were precisely calculated fields of fire. New Haven hadn't just been his home. It had been his fortress, prepared for the day when his past caught up with his present. The third shot disabled the heavy destroyer Crimson Death, leaving her drifting powerless as her crew scrambled to restore main power. The fourth and fifth came in rapid succession, targeting communication arrays and sensor stations with surgical precision. David wasn't trying to destroy the entire fleet. He was systematically blinding and crippling them, preparing for something worse. "Sir," the communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Text only, no visual." The message appeared on Vexthor's command screen in simple, clear Krillian text. "Admiral, you now have 11 ships damaged or destroyed. You have 147 human prisoners aboard your vessels, including my son. I am offering you one final opportunity to release them and withdraw. Refuse, and I will demonstrate why human warfare evolution advanced beyond your current understanding. You have 15 minutes to decide. After that, the gloves come off." Vexthor stared at the message, his 4 arms trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. In 40 years of military service, he had never been threatened by a single opponent. The idea that one human could hold an entire fleet hostage was beyond his comprehension, yet the evidence floated around him in the form of crippled warships and dead crews. "Tactical assessment," he demanded. "Can we maintain operational effectiveness against these surface attacks?" His tactical officer's carapace clicked with nervous energy. "Unknown, sir. The weapon system appears capable of engaging targets throughout the inner system with near-perfect accuracy. Our ships are effectively trapped unless we retreat beyond the range of planetary-based artillery." "And the range of this weapon system?" "Based on projectile velocities and targeting accuracy, potentially unlimited within normal tactical engagement distances." The implications were staggering. David Chun had turned a farming colony into a fortress capable of engaging entire fleets. His 15 years of peaceful existence had been an elaborate deception, a cover story that allowed him to build weapon systems that officially couldn't exist. "Sir," the intelligence officer added quietly, "there's something else. We're detecting massive hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, moving fast. Estimate 40 minutes until arrival." Vexthor's blood ran cold. Human military forces were responding to David Chin's emergency beacon, racing to provide support for their legendary warrior. Soon, this would escalate from a slave raid into a full military engagement between human and Krillian fleets. Fleet composition? Still resolving, sir, but preliminary analysis suggests heavy cruiser-class vessels, possibly an entire sector defense flotilla. The tactical situation had shifted completely. What began as a simple raid on defenseless farmers had become a nightmare scenario that threatened to spark an interstellar incident. Vexthor needed to complete his mission objectives and withdraw before human reinforcements arrived, but David Chun was systematically destroying his operational capability. "Launch all remaining assault shuttles," Vexthor ordered. "Maximum force deployment to the planetary surface. End this threat permanently." The massive assault force that descended toward New Haven represented everything Vexthor had left: 200 elite warriors, heavy assault vehicles, orbital fire support platforms. It was enough firepower to level a city, concentrated against a single human sniper hiding in the ruins of a farming settlement. David watched them come through sensor arrays hidden throughout the surrounding terrain. 200 enemies, equipped with the best weapons and armor that Krillian military technology could provide. Under normal circumstances, it would be suicide to face such odds alone. But David Chin specialized in making normal circumstances irrelevant. The assault force had barely touched down when the first trap triggered. What looked like simple farm equipment revealed its true nature as automated defense turrets rose from concealed positions, their targeting systems linked to David's neural implant. Military-grade weapons that had been disguised as irrigation controls opened fire with devastating precision. The lead assault vehicle simply disintegrated, its armor no match for weapons designed to penetrate starship hulls. Warriors who had survived dozens of battles found themselves under attack from enemies they couldn't see or understand. Every rock, every tree, every piece of farming equipment seemed to hide another weapon system. David moved through the battlefield like a ghost, appearing just long enough to eliminate key targets before vanishing into prepared positions that offered perfect concealment. His rifle spoke with mechanical precision, each shot carefully calculated to maximize confusion and terror among the attacking force. But this time was different. This time, David wasn't just fighting to defend his home. He was fighting to rescue his son. The cold calculations that made him effective were supplemented by something far more dangerous: a father's desperate love for his captured child. The Krillian assault commander, General Thekmore, had studied David Chin's tactical records during the approach. He thought he understood what he was facing: a skilled sniper with advanced weapons and prepared positions. What he hadn't expected was warfare that operated beyond conventional tactical understanding. David wasn't just fighting the assault force. He was dismantling their command structure, their communications, their psychological cohesion. Every shot was part of a larger pattern designed to transform superior numbers into disadvantages. The general watched in growing horror as his elite warriors were systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't even locate. "Orbital fire support," Thekmore commanded. "Coordinates are open. Level everything within 5 kilometers of the settlement center." The order would destroy not just David's position, but also the human prisoners being held in the transport ships on the ground. Thekmore was willing to accept those casualties if it meant eliminating the nightmare that was hunting his forces. But David had anticipated this escalation. The gravitational mass driver that had been crippling ships in orbit suddenly shifted its targeting to atmospheric operations. Instead of launching projectiles into space, it began firing straight up, sending relativistic rounds into the orbital fire support platforms with devastating accuracy. The first platform exploded like a miniature star, its fusion reactor containment failing under the impact of a projectile moving at significant fraction of light speed. The second and third followed within seconds, their debris raining down across New Haven's upper atmosphere in streaks of superheated metal. In orbit, Admiral Vexthor watched his fire support capability vanish with the same impossible precision that had crippled his fleet. David Chen wasn't just defending himself. He was conducting combined arms warfare from a position that shouldn't have been able to threaten anything beyond direct line of sight. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "General Thekmore is requesting immediate evacuation. Ground forces have sustained 80% casualties and are unable to maintain operational effectiveness." "Denied," Vexthor replied grimly. "We don't retreat from single opponents. Sir, the human reinforcements will arrive in 22 minutes. If we don't withdraw soon, we'll be trapped between David Chun and an entire human battle fleet." Vexthor studied his tactical displays, watching the systematic destruction of everything he'd committed to this operation. His fleet was crippled, his ground forces were being slaughtered, and human military vessels were closing fast. Every military instinct told him to retreat immediately and accept the loss. But retreat meant acknowledging defeat at the hands of one human. It meant returning to Krillian space with stories that would be dismissed as impossible fabrications. It meant the end of his career and the destruction of his family's military honor. "Prepare the planetary bombardment systems," he ordered quietly. "If we can't capture the human, we'll eliminate him permanently." The bridge crew exchanged glances of barely concealed horror. Planetary bombardment was a war crime of the highest order, forbidden by every galactic treaty and accord. It meant the deliberate annihilation of civilian populations for military objectives. "Sir," the weapons officer said carefully, "bombardment protocols require authorization from High Command. We don't have clearance for weapons of mass destruction." "Authorization granted under emergency combat protocols," Vexthor replied. "David Chun represents a clear and present danger to Krillian military supremacy. His continued existence threatens our species' expansion into human space." On the surface of New Haven, David's sensors detected the energy buildup in the Krillian dreadnought's primary weapon systems. Planetary bombardment cannons were charging, preparing to sterilize the entire colony from orbit. In minutes, everything he'd built and everyone he'd protected would be reduced to radioactive ash. David opened a communication channel to his son's prison ship, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that would penetrate their containment systems. "Marcus, if you can hear this, I need you to listen carefully. Take cover in the ship's lower compartments and tell the other prisoners to do the same. Things are about to get very loud." Then, David activated the final protocol he'd hoped never to use. Hidden deep beneath New Haven's crust, systems that had been dormant for 15 years came online with the smooth efficiency of military engineering. The planet itself became a weapon as gravitational fields focused into coherent streams of devastating force. The shot that followed was visible as a lance of pure destruction that reached from New Haven's surface to Admiral Vexthor's command ship in 0.7 seconds. It punched through the dreadnought's shields like they were made of tissue paper, penetrated 40 meters of military-grade armor, and detonated in the vessel's primary reactor compartment. The explosion was spectacular. Vexthor's flagship broke apart in a cascade of nuclear fire that lit up New Haven's sky like a second sun. The Admiral died without understanding what had killed him, his last thoughts focused on the impossible sight of his supposedly invulnerable dreadnought dissolving into component atoms. The surviving Krillian vessels fled immediately, abandoning their ground forces and their human prisoners in their desperate rush to escape David Chen's impossible weapons. They scattered in all directions, their crews traumatized by warfare that operated beyond their comprehension. 20 minutes later, the first ships of Sector Defense Fleet 7 dropped out of hyperspace to find New Haven surrounded by debris from Krillian vessels and the remnants of an orbital bombardment that never quite happened. The battle was over, decided by one human sniper against impossible odds. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, commanding the relief force, established communication with the surface immediately. "David Chun, this is Admiral Mitchell, Sector Defense Command. Please confirm your status." David's response came from the ruins of his settlement, broadcast through communication systems that had somehow survived 3 days of intense combat. "Admiral, this is David Chun. Hostile forces have been neutralized. Human prisoners are secure and ready for recovery operations." "Understood." Medical teams are standing by for immediate deployment. What's your assessment of enemy casualties? David looked across the battlefield where 200 elite Krillian warriors had been systematically destroyed, then up at the debris field that had once been one of the most powerful fleets in known space. Total, he replied simply. Enemy forces have been completely eliminated. In the transport ships scattered across New Haven's landing zones, human prisoners began to realize they were safe. Children who had watched their parents being loaded onto slave ships at gunpoint now heard familiar voices calling their names. Families torn apart by alien raiders found themselves being reunited by rescue teams who moved with the professional efficiency of human military forces. And, in the third transport container, Marcus Chun pressed his face against the transparent aluminum walls and watched his father walking across the battlefield, rifle slung over his shoulder with casual ease. The quiet farmer who had taught him to grow tomatoes had just defeated an entire alien fleet single-handedly. Marcus smiled through his tears. He couldn't wait to hear how his father explained this one to his mother. The news of Admiral Vexthor's defeat reached the Krillian High Command within hours, transmitted by the terrified survivors who had witnessed David Chin's impossible victory. In the crystalline towers of the Krillian homeworld, military leaders gathered in emergency session to discuss what many considered the worst tactical disaster in their species' history. Supreme Admiral Zekthar, commander of all Krillian military forces, studied the battle reports with growing unease. The data seemed impossible. A single human had destroyed an entire raiding fleet, eliminated 200 elite warriors, and somehow turned a primitive farming colony into a fortress capable of engaging capital ships in deep space. Verification status? He asked his intelligence staff. Triple confirmed, sir. We have testimony from 17 surviving officers, sensor logs from multiple vessels, and communication intercepts from human military channels. David Chun is not only alive, but has capabilities that exceed our previous assessments by several orders of magnitude. Zekthar's forearms gestured for additional reports. Around the command table, his senior officers shifted nervously, their chitin plates clicking with anxiety. The defeat at New Haven represented more than just military losses. It challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying Krillian expansion strategy. Current threat assessment? He demanded. Admiral Korthval, head of strategic planning, activated the holographic display with obvious reluctance. Sir, David Chun has demonstrated weapons technology that officially doesn't exist in human military databases. The gravitational mass driver alone represents a breakthrough in planetary defense systems that could revolutionize space warfare. More importantly, added Intelligence Director Vexhan, he's proven that humans are capable of military innovation beyond our current understanding. If one retired human soldier can construct such systems in isolation, imagine what their official military research programs might have achieved. The implications were staggering. Krillian military doctrine was built on technological superiority over younger species like humanity. Their expansion into human space relied on the assumption that individual human colonies were defenseless against organized Krillian assault forces. David Chun had just demonstrated that assumption was dangerously wrong. Recommended response? Zekthar asked. Immediate escalation to the Council of War, Admiral Korthval replied. This threat extends beyond normal military operations. We're potentially facing an evolutionary leap in human warfare capabilities. Supreme Admiral Zekthar considered the recommendation carefully. The Council of War consisted of the most senior military and political leaders in Krillian space, convened only during existential threats to their civilization. Calling such a meeting would acknowledge that one human represented a strategic danger to their entire species. But the alternative was pretending that New Haven had been an isolated incident, waiting for David Chun to demonstrate his capabilities again on a larger scale. Convene the council, Zekthar ordered. Full military alert across all border systems. And prepare deep reconnaissance missions into human space. I want to know if David Chun is unique or if humans have been hiding similar capabilities throughout their territory. The decision sent ripples of activity throughout Krillian space as military forces redeployed to defensive positions and intelligence services began the dangerous task of penetrating human military secrets. What had started as a routine slave raid was escalating into preparations for potential interstellar war. On New Haven, David Chun was dealing with consequences he'd hoped to avoid. The arrival of Sector Defense Fleet 7 had brought not just rescue operations, but also military investigators, intelligence analysts, and senior officers who wanted to understand how a retired soldier had defeated an entire Krillian fleet. Admiral Sarah Mitchell had established a temporary command post in the ruins of New Haven Settlement, coordinating refugee operations while her technical teams examined the weapon systems that David had built. The gravitational mass driver alone represented a breakthrough that would revolutionize planetary defense throughout human space. Mr. Chun, Admiral Mitchell said during their first formal debriefing, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. My technical teams are reporting weapons technology that officially doesn't exist, defensive systems that violate established engineering principles, and tactical capabilities that seem impossible for a single operator. David sat across from her in what had once been his kitchen, surrounded by the debris of his former life. Sarah was in her quarters aboard the medical ship, helping traumatized prisoners recover from their captivity. Marcus was receiving treatment for minor injuries, physically healthy, but psychologically shaken by his first direct encounter with galactic realities. I used my military knowledge and resources to prepare for potential threats, David replied carefully. The weapon systems are based on theoretical research from my service days, adapted for civilian construction using readily available materials. Theoretical research that enabled you to engage capital ships from planetary surface positions, Mitchell observed. Mr. Chun, these capabilities could revolutionize how we defend human colonies throughout this sector. The Defense Council needs to understand how they were developed and whether they can be replicated. David had been expecting this conversation. Military authorities would want to study his work, analyze his methods, possibly recruit him back into active service. But David Chun had retired for reasons that went beyond simple war weariness. Admiral, what I built here took 15 years of careful preparation and substantial financial resources. It's not something that can be easily replicated or mass-produced. But it could be adapted, modified, improved by our research teams. Mr. Chun, you've proven that individual human colonies can defend themselves against major military threats. That changes everything about our defensive strategy. Before David could respond, his communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. The signal originated from deep space, transmitted on frequencies that required special authorization to access. David recognized the encryption patterns immediately. It was coming from the highest levels of human military command. Mr. Chun, Admiral Mitchell said quietly, I think you should take that call. The holographic projection that materialized in David's kitchen showed a man he hadn't seen in 15 years. General Marcus Thompson, now Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces, looked older but retained the sharp intelligence that had made him the most effective military leader of his generation. David, Thompson said without preamble, we need to talk. What happened at New Haven has created a situation that extends far beyond local security concerns. General, David acknowledged. I was protecting my family and community from hostile forces. Standard colonial defense protocols. Standard protocols don't include single individuals destroying entire alien fleets, David. What you've accomplished has caught the attention of every major power in this sector of space. The Krillians have convened their Council of War. The Zalakian Republic is mobilizing border forces, and 3 different species have requested intelligence briefings on human military capabilities. The implications were clear. David's defensive actions had been interpreted as a demonstration of human military evolution, a warning that mankind had developed weapons technology beyond galactic understanding. What he'd intended as protection for his family was being seen as a threat by every species that considered humans potential enemies. What do you need from me, General? David asked. Right now, nothing. But we need to discuss your future options carefully. There are political ramifications to consider, strategic implications that affect human security throughout the galaxy. Admiral Mitchell leaned forward. Sir, Mr. Chun has demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize our entire defensive posture. Surely he should be consulted on adapting his innovations for broader deployment. General Thompson's expression grew thoughtful. That's one option, Admiral. But we need to consider whether revealing the full extent of human capabilities serves our long-term interests. Sometimes the most effective weapon is one your enemies don't know you possess. David understood the subtext immediately. His victory at New Haven had been possible because the Krillians hadn't expected serious resistance from a farming colony. They'd committed forces carelessly, positioned themselves predictably, made tactical decisions based on assumptions about human limitations. If every alien species knew that humans could build weapons like the gravitational mass driver, they would adapt their tactics accordingly. The element of surprise that had made David's defense effective would be lost forever. There's another consideration, Thompson continued. David, your actions have made you a symbol of human military capability. Every species in the galaxy is now aware that David Chun is alive and active. That makes you a target for assassination, kidnapping, or worse. The reality of his situation was becoming clear. By defending his family, David had inadvertently revealed himself to enemies who thought he was safely dead. His peaceful life on New Haven was over, replaced by the constant threat of retaliation from species that considered him too dangerous to live. What are you recommending, General? We can offer you several options. Full military reinstatement with a position in strategic planning, allowing you to help develop defensive systems based on your innovations. Relocation to a secure facility where you and your family would be protected while you work on classified projects. Or, Thompson paused, studying David's expression carefully. Or we help you disappear again. New identities, new location, complete separation from your past activities. It would mean abandoning everything you've built here, but it might give you a chance at the peaceful life you've been trying to build. David looked around his destroyed kitchen, at the ruins of the home he'd shared with Sarah and Marcus for 15 years. The gravitational mass driver was already being dismantled by technical teams, its components studied by engineers who would try to understand how he'd built the impossible. New Haven would be rebuilt, but it would never again be the quiet farming community where he'd learned to grow tomatoes and fix irrigation systems. Military observers would monitor the settlement permanently, watching for signs that other humans might possess similar capabilities. I need to discuss this with my family, David said finally. But, General, whatever we decide, I want guarantees about the civilians here. They didn't ask to be part of this situation. Already arranged, Thompson replied. New Haven will receive permanent military protection and substantial reconstruction aid. Your neighbors will be taken care of, regardless of your personal decisions. The communication ended, leaving David alone with Admiral Mitchell and the weight of choices that would define the rest of his life. Through the broken windows of his farmhouse, he could see Marcus helping medical teams tend to freed prisoners, the boy's natural compassion unchanged by his traumatic experiences. Sarah emerged from the medical ship, crossing the debris-strewn yard toward the house. She looked older, marked by the stress of the past few days, but her eyes still held the same strength that had first attracted David during the chaos of the Centauri crisis. The Admiral's been explaining our options, David said when she joined them. I heard most of it through the communication link, Sarah replied. David, we always knew this day might come. We've had 15 good years here, raised a son who understands both peace and the cost of protecting it. Maybe it's time to decide what comes next. Admiral Mitchell gathered her reports, recognizing that the family needed privacy for discussions that would affect the rest of their lives. Take all the time you need, she said. But be aware that every day you remain here increases the risk that hostile forces will attempt retaliation. When they were alone, David and Sarah sat in their destroyed kitchen and contemplated choices that other families never faced. Marcus joined them after ensuring that all the rescued prisoners had been properly treated, his young face serious with newfound understanding of adult realities. Dad, Marcus said quietly, I heard some of the military people talking. They said you saved everyone, but now we have to leave because it's not safe here anymore. That's right, son. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making difficult choices. Where would we go? David looked at Sarah, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her expression. They could disappear again, find another quiet world where David Chun was just a farmer trying to grow tomatoes. They could join the military effort, using David's knowledge to protect other human colonies. Or they could try something entirely new, building a life that acknowledged both their peaceful dreams and the dangerous realities of galactic politics. "We'll figure it out together," Sarah said, taking both their hands. "Whatever we choose, we'll face it as a family." Outside their broken home, rescue ships continued the careful work of reuniting families and treating the traumatized survivors of Krillian slavery. Human military forces established defensive positions around New Haven, preparing for potential retaliation, while technical teams studied weapons that shouldn't have been possible. And, across the galaxy, alien species contemplated the uncomfortable realization that humanity might be more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The quiet farmers of New Haven had revealed claws that could tear apart entire fleets, led by a warrior whose legend had just become terrifyingly real. David Chun had protected his family and saved his community. Now he had to live with the consequences of reminding the galaxy why humans were considered the most dangerous species in known space. 6 months after the Battle of New Haven, as military historians had begun calling it, David Chun stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Frontier Defense Research Station and watched ships from a dozen different human colonies arriving for the quarterly security conference. What had started as one man defending his family had evolved into a revolution in how humanity approached galactic defense. The research station orbited Kepler Prime, a heavily defended system in the heart of human space. Here, in laboratories that officially didn't exist, David worked with the brightest military engineers and theoretical physicists humanity could produce. They were developing weapons and defensive systems based on principles he'd discovered during his 15 years of hidden preparation on New Haven. But the most significant changes weren't technological, they were strategic. The Zalakian Republic has formally requested a non-aggression pact, Admiral Mitchell reported during the morning briefing. She'd been promoted to Director of Colonial Defense after her successful handling of the New Haven crisis. They're offering substantial trade concessions in exchange for guarantees that human colonies won't be armed with gravitational mass drivers. David smiled grimly. "Are we providing those guarantees?" "That depends on whether you think we should." It was a question that had dominated human strategic planning for months. The gravitational mass driver technology was relatively simple once you understood the underlying principles, but it required years of careful preparation and substantial resources to implement effectively. More importantly, it fundamentally changed the balance of power between individual colonies and military fleets. "The Krillians have stopped all slave raids in human space," reported General Thompson, attending the meeting via holographic projection from Earth. "Their expansion efforts have shifted entirely to sectors where they don't risk encountering prepared human defenses." "And the other species?" Mixed reactions. "The Vorthan Collective has increased their military patrols along our border, claiming they're responding to the threat of human aggression. The hegemony of suns has actually requested technical consultations about planetary defense systems, apparently hoping we'll share the technology." David considered the political landscape that his actions had created. By demonstrating that individual human colonies could defend themselves against major military threats, he'd forced every galactic power to recalculate their strategic relationships with humanity. Some species viewed this as a threat that needed to be contained. Others saw it as an opportunity for alliance or protection. "Recommendation?" Thompson asked. "Limited deployment," David replied after careful consideration. "Select colonies in strategic positions, with full security protocols and experienced operators. We don't arm every farming settlement, but we make sure that potential aggressors understand the risks of attacking human civilian populations." "The deterrent effect," Admiral Mitchell nodded. "If they know that any human colony might possess planet-killing weapons, they'll approach all of them with extreme caution." It was psychological warfare on a galactic scale, using the reputation David had earned at New Haven to protect human settlements throughout the frontier. The mere possibility that other colonies might possess similar defenses would make potential enemies think twice before risking military action. "There's another consideration," David added. "Training. We need to make sure that humans throughout the frontier understand basic defensive principles, even without advanced weapons. What I accomplished at New Haven wasn't just about technology. It was about preparation, tactical awareness, and understanding how to turn disadvantages into advantages." The training programs had already begun. Throughout human space, colonial militias were learning tactics that David had refined during his years of preparation. How to use familiar terrain against technologically superior enemies. How to coordinate defensive actions using agricultural equipment and civilian infrastructure. How to think like soldiers when necessary while remaining farmers and families when possible. Marcus Chun, now 13 and considerably more serious than most boys his age, had become something of a symbol for human resilience. He attended classes at the research station's educational facility, studying alongside the children of other military families while learning lessons that most civilians never needed to consider. "Dad," Marcus said during one of their evening walks through the station's recreational areas, "I've been thinking about what happened on New Haven." "What about it?" "The Krillians took me because they thought humans were weak. Easy targets. But you showed them they were wrong." David nodded, remembering the fear in his son's eyes when he'd been loaded onto that transport ship, the determination he'd shown during the rescue operations afterward. "Son, strength isn't just about weapons or fighting ability. It's about being willing to protect the people you care about, even when the cost is high." "Is that why you left the military before? Because the cost was too high?" It was a perceptive question from a boy who had experienced more of galactic realities than most adults. David had never fully explained his reasons for retiring, but Marcus was old enough now to understand complex motivations. "I left because I wanted to build something instead of just destroying things," David replied carefully. "But sometimes you have to be capable of destruction in order to protect what you've built." "Are you going back to the military now?" David considered the question. His current position was technically civilian, a research consultant working on classified projects. But the distinction was largely academic. He was once again part of the human war machine, using his knowledge to prepare for conflicts that might determine the survival of his species. "I'm doing what I need to do to keep humans safe," he said finally, "including you and your mother." Sarah had adapted to their new circumstances with characteristic determination. She worked in the station's medical facilities, treating personnel and their families while maintaining the healing skills she'd developed during their peaceful years on New Haven. The transition hadn't been easy, but she understood the necessity of their choices. "David," she said that evening as they reviewed security reports in their quarters, "General Thompson wants to brief you on the new detection protocols tomorrow. Apparently, the Krillians have been attempting to infiltrate several border colonies, probably looking for intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Any successful penetrations? None reported, but the attempts are becoming more sophisticated. They're learning from what happened at New Haven, adapting their tactics to account for the possibility of hidden defenses." It was exactly what David had expected. His victory had bought humanity time and strategic advantage, but it had also educated their enemies about human capabilities. Future conflicts would be more difficult as alien forces adapted to counter the tactics that had proven effective. The communication system in their quarters activated with an incoming priority message. David recognized the encryption signature immediately. It was coming from one of the deep reconnaissance teams monitoring Krillian space. "Phoenix Base, this is Deep Watch 7, the operative reported. "We have intelligence on Krillian military developments that requires immediate escalation to strategic command." David activated his security protocols, ensuring the communication was properly encrypted and recorded for analysis. "Go ahead, Deep Watch 7. "Sir, Krillian forces have been conducting extensive training exercises focused on counterinsurgency operations and planetary assault tactics. They appear to be developing specific protocols for engaging prepared human defensive positions. Expected threat assessment. Unknown, sir. But they're investing substantial resources in this training program, and they're incorporating lessons learned from the New Haven engagement. Whatever they're planning, it's designed specifically to counter your tactics." David felt a familiar chill of anticipation. The enemy was adapting, preparing for the next round of conflict with improved understanding of human capabilities. The peaceful interlude following New Haven was ending, replaced by the kind of strategic chess match that had defined his military career. "Any indication of timeline or target selection?" "Negative, sir. But the scale of their preparations suggests they're planning something significant." Recommend increased alert status for all frontier colonies. The communication ended, leaving David and Sarah to contemplate the implications. The Battle of New Haven had been a decisive victory, but it was also just the opening move in a larger game. Krillian military planners were working to ensure that future encounters would have different outcomes. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Unknown. Could be months, could be years. But they'll come eventually, and when they do, they'll be better prepared. David activated his personal communication system, establishing contact with Admiral Mitchell and General Thompson. If the Krillians were preparing for renewed conflict, humanity needed to accelerate their own defensive improvements. The meeting that followed included senior officers throughout human space, connected by secure communications that allowed real-time strategic planning across multiple star systems. David's assessment of Krillian capabilities and probable intentions shaped defensive preparations that would affect millions of human civilians. Recommendations for priority deployments? Admiral Mitchell asked. David studied the holographic display showing human colonies throughout the frontier region. Each settlement represented families like his own, people who had chosen to build new lives on the edge of known space. They deserved the same protection he'd tried to provide for New Haven. Focus on colonies with strategic value or symbolic importance, he advised. The Krillians will want to demonstrate that they can overcome our new defensive capabilities, so they'll choose targets that maximize psychological impact. Any specific vulnerabilities we should address? Training. Technology is only effective if people know how to use it properly. We need more personnel who understand both the tactical principles and the psychological elements of defensive warfare. Over the following weeks, David found himself developing training programs that would prepare ordinary colonists for extraordinary circumstances. Farmers learning to think like soldiers. Families preparing for the possibility that their peaceful lives might require them to become warriors. Marcus often accompanied him during these planning sessions, observing adult discussions about war and survival with the serious attention of someone who had experienced both personally. The boy was learning lessons that most children never needed to understand, but they were lessons that might determine whether humanity survived as a free species. Dad, Marcus asked during one such session, do you think we'll ever have real peace? Where families don't have to worry about aliens attacking their homes? David considered the question carefully. Throughout human history, peace had always been a temporary condition between periods of conflict. The galaxy was too vast, contained too many competing species with different values and objectives. Son, peace isn't something that just happens. It's something that good people have to build and defend, sometimes at great cost. What we're doing here is trying to make sure that human families can live safely, even when other species prefer conflict to cooperation. Are we the good people in this situation? I hope so. But that's something each person has to decide for themselves, based on their actions and their intentions. As David watched his son processing these complex ideas, he reflected on the choices that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a farmer trying to grow tomatoes and raise a family in peace. Now he was helping to prepare humanity for potential interstellar war while trying to preserve the values that made their civilization worth defending. The irony wasn't lost on him. In order to protect peace, he'd become a weapon again. In order to defend his family's quiet life, he'd been forced to abandon it entirely. But sometimes the only way to preserve what you love is to sacrifice your personal happiness for larger necessities. Outside the research station's windows, ships from across human space continued arriving for the security conference. Engineers, military officers, and civilian leaders working together to ensure that what happened at New Haven wouldn't be an isolated incident. Humanity was preparing for whatever came next, armed with knowledge that one man's love for his family could reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. David Chun had wanted nothing more than to grow tomatoes and watch his son learn to be a good man. Instead, he'd become a symbol of human determination and a reminder that even the quietest people could become dangerous when their families were threatened. The galaxy had learned to fear the name David Chun once again. More importantly, it had learned to fear humanity itself, not as conquerors or aggressors, but as a species that would never stop fighting for the right to live in peace. In the end, that might be the most human thing of all. The willingness to become monsters in defense of the innocent, to sacrifice personal happiness for the safety of others, to transform love into a weapon capable of protecting what matters most. The stars themselves would remember the lesson of New Haven. When humanity's children are threatened, humanity itself becomes something that even the darkness fears to face.